Hey all, it's been a minute. I've been pretty busy with classes and stuff, but I've been working on many projects in the background. My proboscidean phylogeny video is still coming, but it's turned out to be a lot of work. Definitely more work than I was expecting, because there's basically like zero parsimony between any trees, especially within Elephantidae. I have some other plans for this channel that will probably come to fruition within the next month or so, but I won't reveal too much of my hand yet. In the meantime, though, if you for some reason enjoy my personality, I've been hopping into a bunch of live streams on SpeedOfSoundOfGravity's channel. For example, yesterday, at the time of uploading, I participated in a conversation with an abiogenesis researcher, so that was really cool. Also, a few days ago, we had a conversation with Standing for Truth about Neanderthals, which, while I agree Neanderthals are really cool, they are definitely not nested within modern Homo sapiens. Anyways, this is just a piece of that live stream, so if you want to see the other 90% of my content, go subscribe to Speed of Sound. Of course, all the links to any papers, as well as Speed's channel and the original live stream are in the description. So now it's time for me to step out and let Walker from the past start speaking. Peace all.
Okay, we are lively with an amazing crew. Standing for Truth is here. This will go well, right?
Oh, of course. It's always a good time.
It's always
It's
a good
always
time.
Monday night fun.
Right.
It's an honor being on your show.
Yeah.
All's fair in love and war, as they say.
Hey, just because we disagree doesn't mean we can't be friends.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
My
fair
best friend's an agnostic. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a little stronger than an agnostic, but that's okay.
Hey, at least we can bond over coffee.
That's
Hey.
true. That's true. We got something in common.
Yeah. So, were you around when Jason Ezard melted down last night?
No, I
Did you hear it?
I think I left the after show maybe about 45 minutes after. I was kind of tired after the debate and stuff. So, no, I didn't see any of that.
Oh, that was epic. It was epic. It was just unbelievable. It woke me up. I went and made a pot of coffee, and I stayed up till like 3:30. So,
Oh, so you drink coffee late too then?
no, normally I don't. I try to go to sleep because I get up at about 4. But last night I decided, you know what? I don't really care anymore about time and stuff.
It all just blends together. And
I mean, this whole, being stuck in my house, it's just like become sort of a battle between me and, depression and I don't know what else.
me, myself, and I.
Yeah, what is our
You can have debates with yourself.
what
Part
in the
of you
hell?
can be the creationist, the other part of you can be the evolutionist.
I could try that. I got 2 more of your books today from Raw Matt's books. What are the odds? And Evolutionary Rescue Device. So
How many more of the books? 2?
2 more, yeah, 2 more today.
You're the one putting my kids through college. I mean,
I am.
If I keep
Yeah.
writing these books and you keep buying them, I might be able to retire within the next year.
Yeah, if your kids need some good books on evolution and stuff, just call me up and I'll hook them up.
Listen, I've sold 6, 5 to you and 1 to my wife, and she hasn't read it yet. So,
So that's all you've sold. How many? Have you
no,
sold?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
How many have you sold? You want to tell us?
Speed. Okay, you know what? If you can guess within 10, I'll tell you. But if you're way off, I can't tell you. We're gonna make this fun.
67.
67. You're not within 10, but you are pretty close. No, I think it's in the 90s.
Okay.
And I think most of them have been to you.
Yeah, I was going to say 92.
Well, there you go. You're close. I don't know.
Yes.
According to Amazon, I hear they're a little bit off, but yeah, it's in the 90s. So.
I don't know if you know it or not, but if you hold down your mouse key on that Amazon one click, it just keeps ordering.
So you're saying I could have 1,000 sold by the end of the night?
Probably could.
Wow, you know what? I'm going to be busy tonight. Actually, one thing that's on my mind. So you said you had a pot of coffee at 3:30, but typically you get up at 4:30.
I had a pot of coffee at 12 last night, and I stayed up
To
till
keep you
3:30.
up till 3:30, but you slept in a little bit this morning.
I slept till 7:30 this morning, which is extremely late for me.
So about a 4-hour sleep.
Yeah, but I had 2 naps, so I started taking my cues from my cats. They seem to know what they're doing.
Right. Right.
So they go to sleep, I go to sleep.
So you're a cat guy versus a dog guy then, eh?
I'm both.
You're both, yeah.
I love Saint Bernards.
He's like
So
30 raccoons.
And I
So
have
do you
30
have a
raccoons.
dog and a cat then?
Our Saint Bernard, we had to let him go about 2 years ago. He had hip dysplasia.
Ooh.
His name was Dozer. He was 9 years old and he couldn't walk anymore. Me and my son had to, we got a harness for him, and we'd each pick up, it had 4 handles, and we'd have to carry him out. It was, and he just got so that he wasn't enjoying his life anymore. So we had to let Dozer go. It was a horrible thing because he was a young dog, right? 9 years old. Yeah.
It's never easy.
Oh my God.
With us, it's always the same, that it hurts too much when we put him down. So we always say, you know what, this is the last dog we're going to get. And within a month or two, we end up getting another one. It's just too hard to live without man's best friend, you know? Yeah. And I love cats too. Unfortunately, the allergies to them, I love them, but within an hour of being around a cat, the eyes, the throat, they're cute.
I sneeze every morning. My cat's just brought a mouse in the house, so.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
More affection sessions.
Yeah, and he's under this padding I have for my computer, and
you just have a dead mouse under your computer.
Dinner time. Here you go, Daddy.
Never gets hungry in the middle of the live stream. Speaking.
No, Walker, you don't understand. They don't kill the mice. They just carry them in the house and then they chase them around. So if I start screaming like a girl, it's because the mouse ran up my pant leg.
Hey, it happens to the best of us.
It does.
The mouse is looking for a safe place. The whole poor damn thing's traumatized, or it's going to get killed by your cat.
Yeah, I know that.
It's never going to be the same. If I look down and see the mouse, sitting right there, I don't know. I'd
scream.
This coffee would be all over the place.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm pretty good around like wildlife, except for like spiders and snakes for the most part.
Yeah, snakes.
Oh boy, spiders and snakes.
I can't even hold a snake. It was about a year ago. Where I live, we don't see too many snakes, but we were going for a walk on a trail that we're around. But a year ago, my daughter would have been 3, and then all of a sudden, just some gardener snake came slithering right by, and my daughter was traumatized for the next 3 days.
Right.
Not fun.
Yeah. The thing is, like, I remember when I was younger, like, you hold a snake or something like that, and you let it do what it tries to do. It's just the weirdest thing about snakes that annoys me is like they will try to find like whatever position aggravates you the most and just coil themselves around you.
Wrapped around your neck.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, you could choose anywhere to do it, but you chose my neck. Really? Come on.
Now the question is, would you hold one of those anacondas?
Oh dear God. I've had friends that have done that before.
No, really.
Like, no,
I don't think you could pay. I don't think you could pay me enough. Would you rather fight an anaconda or a lion?
No, anaconda.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, if the snake,
death, though.
If the snake is big enough for me to ride, then I don't want anything to do with it.
I don't think anacondas get pretty big.
I think one of those scary experiences I've had with wildlife was like in elementary school. It's amazing the type of shit they can get away with. So they had like a wildlife professional come in, we're protecting bald eagles and, because the eagles are trying to survive and people are poaching their nest and all this other crap. Okay. Well, which of you wants to hold on to this glove? Okay. I'm like 8 years old, so I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm like, oh, well, I will. And immediately the tone shifts. It's like, okay, well, put this on your hand and don't move a muscle. Like, don't think, don't move. And within seconds, this bird, it's like a hawk or an eagle or something. It comes down, like, clutches, like 20 feet in like 3 seconds. And like lands on my hand. I'm like, whoa, okay. So that's what it's like to be the prey for a bald eagle. Okay.
Yeah. Your life flashes right before your eyes. Well, when it comes to wildlife, It's funny how, like, for example, when I can't stand centipedes. And
Oh,
when you
yeah.
get a centipede in the house, like, it's just so small compared to us as a human. But yet, the way I kill it is I'm either using an entire roll of paper towels, which my wife
Right.
kills me for, it's a waste of money, or like the biggest shoe or boot that I got in the house.
Right, and they're hard to catch, man. They can
They
move.
are hard to catch, yeah, and they're disgusting too.
Do you know what else is cool? We've got, I don't know if every species does this, but we have the ones here, they're green and black. They're really pretty under a microscope, but they actually throw off their legs and their legs start twitching. If you pursue them, they throw they'll rip off their legs and throw it behind them, and the leg twitches for about a minute or two.
Oh.
And that is their defense mechanism to get away from prey. And I mean, if I were chasing somebody and he ripped off his leg and threw it at me, I think I'd let him go. Man, that's some badass shit.
Yeah, that would be pretty.
It's like those sea urchins that just puke their guts out at you. It's like, okay, I'm backing off now.
Yeah, that person would earn my respect. I think he's some kind of mutant from X-Men or something, ripping off his leg and tossing it at me as a defense mechanism.
So the reason we're gathered here is because of your debate last night. Your what we feel is your misunderstanding between mutation and hypermutation, and at the same time, inbred homozygosity among a population. So
wait a minute. Two things. Did you just say my name? Misunderstanding?
I did.
And
Misunderstanding.
We did. You caught us in the act.
yeah.
Misunderstanding.
Not red-handed.
Uh-oh.
And homozygosity, heterozygosity. I've never heard these words used before. Can you define these terms for me there, Speedy?
Understanding.
They sound cool though.
We do.
Sound like a really snazzy argument.
Yeah, like it just flows off the tongue.
It does.
I want a shirt that just says, one side homozygosity, the other side heterozygosity, with RJ Downer pulling out his hair. I'm just kidding. I love RJ.
Like one side's a solid color and the other one has like tie-dye.
Yes. Actually, you know what? I like that idea. I think that's going to be the next shirt. I'm going to send it. You know what? Since you've bought 99.9% of the books there, I'll get that shirt made and I'll send it to you. I'll just need your address.
Cool. I can give you my address.
Misunderstanding.
Wait a minute. Should I give you my address?
You can try.
No. Then you'll have a whole cohort of creationists just traveling in groups.
Yeah.
I'm not one to take it. I can disagree and debate and discuss, but I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I ever attacked somebody's personal life. That is, you know what I mean? Like I've never debated somebody to the point where I just hated them, where I just had to mess with their personal life. It doesn't even cross my mind, to be honest.
Yeah, as long as you don't give it to Maddox or Smokey or Jason Ezard, that would be frightening.
Hey, they love you too. So okay, what are your thoughts then on the? And then I'll just kind of sit back and soak it in. But what are your thoughts on the hypermutation for the Neanderthals? Dr. Jensen has two explanations, as Dr. Stern Cardinal and I discussed. He proposes that maybe the DNA itself has been subject to chemical damage and is therefore not reliable. Dr. Dan and I agreed that it is reliable for the most part. And the second explanation is the hypermutation. So we could just skip right to the hypermutation. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you feel like it doesn't work? And if you want to kind of reiterate Dr. Dan's arguments there, go ahead. I'm genuinely interested.
Okay, if there was a human line, that basically came off of, point A, and went up, and then a branch came out, and that was your Neanderthals, right? That's what you're proposing?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you'd have yes. Yeah. And it would have been a breakaway population, correct? So it would be a branch off.
And you said something about, for timing, you said something around Babel.
I hold a slightly different position regarding the Neanderthal. So I do believe that a lot of the breakaway populations were post-Babel when it comes to Homo floresiensis, when it comes to Erectus, Naledi, for example. But I believe Neanderthals, based on their physique and based on how well adapted they appeared to be, I'm more comfortable saying that they probably broke away from the main population pre-Babel. So I don't think that they were part of the actual Babel event. I think that they were already migrated to Eurasia and Europe, for example.
So pre-Babel, how does Babel relate to the flood in timing?
Within I'd say, well, definitely within 1,000 years after the flood, probably within, well, let's go with 500, 600 years.
500 years. Okay, so
He's taking
sometime, so that would be 4,400, probably maybe 5,000 years ago, the Neanderthals broke off. So 5K, right?
So if we're going with the pre-Babel, then the Neanderthals would have split off.
Oh, so it would be after the flood, but before Babel.
Exactly. So if the flood was 4,500 years ago, let's say let's say Neanderthals split away about 4,200 years ago.
4.2K. Okay. So then your idea is that they split off and then all these changes happened to them after that. And they became, the brows got bigger and they got beefier and bigger brains, that sort of thing?
Yeah, good question. Like I've watched a lot of lectures from the secular side regarding human evolution and multi-regional theory, out of Africa theory, and they all seem to agree, the experts at least, the ones that I've watched, they all seem to agree that their physique was influenced by the cold and harsh environments in the Ice Age type conditions, for example. So they all admit that, the Neanderthals were incredibly robust. They'll say that they were well adapted to not only that environment, but various other environments. Actually, they go through, it's very interesting, they go through the skeletons and they show how the striation within the skeletons reflect just how muscular they really were. So I would say that a lot of their features, though, like especially the robustness and the brow ridges, the larger nose, they've even said helps retain heat, for example. So yeah, those would be adaptations via environment, probably.
And you believe those happened through mutation or what?
Environmental changes, therefore, probably epigenetic.
You're going to say the epi word. Okay. So you said the epi word. Okay.
I know you love that word.
Yeah.
See, it seems to be unanimous decision that consensus in the lectures that I've watched and the papers that I've read where they say, they admit there's still so much they need to know about the Neanderthals, but there seems to be a general, and if you guys have heard anything differently, let me know, but there seems to be an overwhelming consensus that the physique, the atypical features are the result of environmental related conditions. And we do know that environment can influence the epigenome. Wouldn't you agree with that, Speed?
No, not that much. No. Epigenetics is it's not a miracle worker. It can do some things. You can shut genes off, turn genes on, based on heat shock or, something on that order, but it is not going to, it can have an effect on evolution, but the way it has an effect on evolution is that if it does change the phenotype enough to survive in a different environment, that gives mutations a chance to be selected for that environment. But if it doesn't happen pretty quickly, then you're going to, epigenetics is not going to save you. Epigenetics is not going to survive for more than a few generations. It's going to have an effect. So it's not going to change a population other than through this hypothetical mechanism that they are talking about now, that could possibly, like, behavior before mutation is kind of the hypothesis, but let's set that aside for a moment. Epigenetics is not capable of changing a phenotype that much. Not to the point where you get a big brain. If it were, every time we went to northern Minnesota, or we'd start to grow bigger, right?
Well, we
Our
have
brains would grow. Maybe that explains why I'm such a fucking genius.
That could be it, Speed. We just solved it. Well, when it comes to the adaptations seen in the Neanderthal, like I said, that helps to generate and retain body heat, the fact that they had large noses and strong brow ridges, like you said, and they had larger brain sizes, just a little similar to modern humans, but a little bit bigger. Now, if they were closer to creation and the flood, for example, after the Ark, if this was pre-Babel, then it all depends what those people would have looked like how big were their brains, because when it comes to epigenetics, which is just the study of gene expression, switching chemical genetic switches that flip genes on and off. Based on these, I'm not saying it is epigenetic for sure. I think that there was some influence there based on environment. But how would you explain, I guess, according to your position, how would you explain those adaptations? Because as I said, there seems to be overwhelming consensus that those atypical features, the robust physique, for example, the big nose, brow ridges, they were the result of the harsh environmental conditions of the Ice Age. Like, the evolutionary community agrees with that. Would you say that's due to mutation then, Speed?
Yeah, mutation and selection. And over a period of 400,000 years or something on that order. I mean, that's reasonable. So, but I guess
according to, but you would also agree that they were highly inbred and that they suffered from that high genetic load too, right? Like, you'd agree with Dr. Cardinal and myself that the evidence suggests that they were highly inbred due to the isolation and the inbreeding, of course.
Yeah, especially, and does Walker, do you know anything about this inbreeding thing? Okay, we found fossils, we got the DNA, and the inbreeding is based on what? It's based on the DNA.
So yeah, you can track like how much inbreeding there is based on the homozygosity within populations. But all the DNA samples we have are from late surviving populations, so we can't necessarily make assumptions from the early populations. I just agree. Because so within the evolutionary time frame, all of our DNA samples are from like 30,000 years ago to about 70 or 80,000 years ago. And at that point, they were already coexisting and potentially experiencing pressures from Homo sapiens sapien, as well as that this is when the what is it called? The most recent glacial maximum. Or no, not the most recent glacial maximum, but this was an interglacial period, right? So they're already experiencing a more or less change of ecosystem and less megafaunal species to predate on, stuff like that. And also another thing, I don't have a paper for this, but I remember reading it like a couple of years ago. People theorize that the reason that our species became so prolific comparatively is because we have better social adaptation. So we know that Neanderthals lived in groups of like 10 to 12, like mostly familial communities. And of course, when you're living with your family, who are you going to marry? Your cousin. Whereas early humans that were moving into Europe usually lived in groups of like 200 to 500, like fairly large, substantial tribes with a lot more gene flow.
Yeah.
Actually, I 100% agree with what I think that's a really good point that even I would like to emphasize more. Actually, because I know Speed likes kind of the sources. I am sharing screens. Speed, I think you would have to probably approve it. Just a couple of the papers that suggest that they were highly inbred. But what Walker said is actually brilliant in that the sequences we have seem to be of the later, I guess, existence of the Neanderthals during the time when they were probably the most inbred, during the time when they have the most recessive mutations that have come to the forefront. And because, like, for example, this paper right here, I don't know if you shared screen or not, but where it says the Neanderthal genome included harmful mutations that made the hominids around 40% less reproductively fit than modern humans. This, like Walker said, probably was closer to their extinction versus closer to when they actually migrated and when they were at their best genetically, if one could say it that way. So I'd actually agree with him on that one. So it's tough to say, what were their genetics like prior to the extensive inbreeding and prior to the incredible loss in heterozygosity. So I'm actually going to emphasize that a little bit more. I'm glad you mentioned that, Walker.
Yep. Yeah. Do you have any more points on this, Speed?
I'm just looking at that article that is a Science Direct article. It's not a paper. Neanderthals.
It's based off. I wonder if I got the paper in here. Let me see. I've got the paper saved as well that I can. If you want to read the whole paper, I can send that to you.
Well, this is an article. So the genetic cost of Neanderthal introgression by Harris. So that's Harris 2016. I think I have that somewhere.
Do you? I think you would. This one is the introgression one I've got up here. Let me see.
Let's see. I'm looking for my standing in poop file folder.
Maybe it might be right next to your collection of my 90 books.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, there's this one where Eric Trinkos goes into it as well.
You want to talk about that, Walker?
I would love to talk about Eric.
I'd love to talk about it too, Stanley. I'm glad you brought this one up.
So I've been meaning to do this for like the past week or so, but I was looking it up, and apparently Eric Trinkhaus is a professor at my university in a department that I'm involved in.
Yes, I remember you saying that actually.
Yeah. So I've been meaning to reach out to him about
talk to him.
I haven't yet. But
I was going to say, oh no, my cover's up already.
Yeah. I definitely plan on doing that soon, though, because I think that would just be an interesting conversation. And I need him in to find a minor advisor as well. So
Interesting puts it nicely.
Well, have you listened to any lectures by, I don't even know if I'm saying it right. I think so. Pabo, last name Paabo. He's a big influence in the paleo community when it comes to the Neanderthals. And he's got a lot of interesting stuff to say on their DNA, the out of Africa, the multi-regional. You can just YouTube or Google it, right? Pabo, P-A-B-O, Neanderthals. You'll find a ton of lectures on it. But my prediction, when you talk to Eric Trinkos, he's going to admit that, yes, where we see inbreeding in the fossil record, we also see pathology. We see, and Dr. Cardinal is right. Oftentimes, most of the time, we don't have the genetics. We're lucky to have the genetics of the Denisovans and the Neanderthals.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have the genetics of Homo floresiensis, Naledi, Heidelbergensis, Erectus, unfortunately. I'd predict that if we do end up getting DNA from Erectus, it'll be pretty similar to Neanderthals, but that's just a prediction. Well, he'll admit that, we do see pathology. We do see... Because I know he examined some sequences of the Neanderthal right here that says they had higher levels of homozygosity, implying pervasive inbreeding. At this point, I don't think there's anybody that disagrees that they weren't highly inbred. I know there was a point in time where people would dispute it. I don't think many do anymore. Here's your genetic cost of Neanderthal introgression there, Speed. But my guess is, he would admit to the disease and the pathology and the fact that there's a lot, which seems... which is odd, he says that it is odd that there's so much, but obviously he's not going to hold to my overall conclusion. I've come to a different conclusion than he did. So, I mean, I think it's obvious that he would conclude that, but Walker, go ahead. What's your take on it? What's your take on Trinkos?
Oh, well, I don't think so I was his results, at least. I haven't done a super in-depth study of this paper yet.
Here's the problem with Trinkhaus.
But he concludes at least that the pathologies observed are due to a number of different factors. Inbreeding probably contributed to a higher number of them, but also the fact that we know Neanderthals cared for their dead. The facts that, if you don't die in a war and you're dying in a cave instead, you're more likely to be fossilized, right?
Right.
Or not fossilized, but subfossilized, I guess. That's not a word. But, there was a number of factors that also include societal factors of Neanderthals caring for their weak and all that kind of stuff that would have helped these people with debilitating conditions still reach adulthood and stuff like that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up too. Like, what are your thoughts on the fact that if my screen's still shared, I mean, you can see in the last few decades, the things you mentioned, buried their dead. We know that they interbred with humans, of course, but the fact that they made musical instruments is pretty cool. Tools, cosmetics, jewelry, purses. I've read so many articles on Smithsonian how they go over all the many things that you're talking about and how they even use bones for weapons. They used stone tools for woodworking. I know you see that here. Let's see. Yeah, research suggests they fashioned tools, buried their dead. Maybe, like I heard Dr. Rana, when he was debating Erica, he questioned whether or not they really did bury the dead. But we actually find Neanderthals and anatomically modern humans buried together, indicating that it was done intentionally. So what are your thoughts on somebody like Dr. Rana that would...
Let's back the truck up back to Trinkhaus.
Okay.
All the way to Trinkhaus. Okay. Trinkhaus.
Walker's the one that brought up the buried the dead and got me...
Yeah, sorry. I would like to talk about that. I think that's interesting, but different time.
Is the truck backed up now? We okay? So what do they say about, what does Trinkhaus say about Neanderthals? Nothing.
Oh, no, he does.
So what?
Yeah, he's right here. Let me see. I think it's Trinkhaus. Yeah, Eric Trinkhaus. Let's see. 3 Neanderthal sequences exhibit high levels of homozygosity, implying pervasive inbreeding among their ancestors. The Neanderthals have also been characterized as having low genetic diversity overall relative to recent humans. So that's something Dr. Cardinal and I agreed on. So he does touch on the Neanderthals, probably because we only have Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. The other pathology and disease, he's looking at just the bones themselves, deformities in the skull, the phalanges, things like that.
3 Neanderthal sequences. The problem is I can't find that text in this paper.
An abundance of developmental anomalies and abnormalities in the Pleistocene. You don't see that in the paper itself?
Is that the abstract?
3 Neanderthal. Because, okay, 3 Neanderthal. No, it's not in the paper. The only mention made in that paper on Neanderthals is in the reference sections. There's some post-Neanderthal genome. And okay, what was your point in your book about putting this paper in there and say you were trying to make the point that the fossils that we find are abnormal humans, right? Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So the problem with that is this paper is not about fossils that are found in Africa. This paper by Trinkhaus is all in Europe. These are all European fossils, and these are late fossils. These are Pleistocene.
Yeah,
right?
Pleistocene. That's right.
Southwestern France, and we got I think where the hell we have here. So anyway, that has nothing to do with these fossils in Africa. So this paper is not evidence of that, and I cannot find that Neanderthal quote. So where did that? So let's see if we can figure out where that quote came from.
I found it actually. So yeah, for some reason, Trinkhaus. If you were doing like the search where you type in a word and you find it, Trinkhaus spells Neanderthal throughout the paper without an H after the T. So that might have messed up your spelling.
Okay, I'll have.
So it's a good and thank you, Walker.
Of course.
I've noticed, a lot of people Neanderthal. I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, they were discovered in Neanderthal Valley. Neander Valley. So I guess that's why everybody gets confused over the tall, or is it Thal?
Yeah. So if you're doing it German, it would be Neanderthal, but spelled with a TH.
Right.
But it doesn't really matter. As long as you're, as long as people know what you're talking about.
So what Speed brought up was a good point and something worthy to address. Mm-hmm. So Trinkhaus points out throughout the paper that oftentimes the bones that are found to be old, of course, they'd be considered old. He's finding them in the Pleistocene people, are also riddled with pathology and disease. Now, the one thing fascinating that he points out that I personally find fascinating is that he says that this pathology cannot be due to chance. There's just too much. So a lot of the bones that you look to, like, I mean, if you look to Homo floresiensis, of course, clearly diseased, clearly displaying pathology. So this is just corroborate, like what you said about how they're not found in Africa.
Right.
That's precisely right. Because we know, according to the out of Africa scenario, and Dr. Cardinal and I talked about this quite extensively yesterday, when modern humans migrated out of Africa, lo and behold, they met up with other people groups, right? Neanderthals, I believe Heidelbergensis, or people, I know some people propose that Heidelbergensis evolved into Neanderthals independently, but it looks like that's why now they propose a first out of Africa migration with Erectus leaving, a subgroup of Erectus leaving, and independently evolving into the other hominins in Eurasia, in Europe, for example. From my Denisovans, yeah. Obviously, like your islanders, like your hobbits and Naledi, and the newest one that they found. So a lot of the hominins that I say are diseased and riddled with pathology, and the bones are not transitional, the atypical nature of them, or because they're pathological, are, yes, you're right, they're not found in Africa, and I believe I make that clear. But I also point out the fact that your paleo experts agree that they've all, the way Erica and I always explain it, it's like Middle Earth if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, and you got all these different so-called species of Homo living at the same time, where many of them have actually, have actually exchanged genetics. They've interbred, for example. And that's why, and I don't know if you want to answer this question now or later, but that's why I kept asking Dr. Cardinal, if Neanderthals were then, that means they were separated for about 400,000 years roughly, while there is extensive genetic reshaping going on in Africa for Erectus to evolve into Homo sapiens before they migrated, met up with Neanderthals, and lo and behold, they produced healthy, fertile offspring. So how did they remain so interfertile with two independent genetic reshapings going on in Africa and then in Eurasia and Europe where the Neanderthals are found?
Dr. Dan answered that a couple of times. There are I think he said there are some species that separated 2 million years ago. In order for something to mate, all you need is the right number of chromosomes, and you need an assemblage of the right genes to create a viable phenotype. And that is not, if there isn't a great deal of mutation or selected mutation in that 2 million years, there's no reason why two species with 2 million years separation could mate. There's in fact, there could be very weird matings between really diverse, well, not that diverse, but like various bears and canids and things of that nature.
So hybridization is really weird, but I don't think 400,000 years is a very long time. But as far as like evolutionary processes go and interfertility and all that, that's really not that long. We have ligers, despite the fact that like lions and tigers diverged about 3.5 million years ago. And did you see where the sturgeon and the paddlefish hybridized, which they have like a divergence from the Jurassic about 100 to 120 million years ago?
You got to send me a paper on that because
I thought it did. But it's crazy. Because
I know a guy who did nothing but study. In fact, he works for our company as a programmer now. But his handle is Paddlefish. So that's all he did is Paddlefish at the University of Minnesota in molecular biology. Anyway, so back to Trinkhaus. So that is not evidence at all for any of the fossils found in Africa that those could be basically abnormal humans.
Which fossils are you referring to in Africa?
I don't know much about fossils in Africa. I'm going to have to defer to Walker on that. But that was your point. Oh, wait a minute, that was your point, right?
Talking about, because the ones I'm talking. Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, was that your point? That basically the fossils that we found in Africa that we can't get DNA out of, and I want to ask you a question about that. Those fossils are the ones that you are saying are abnormal humans, right? what do you call it? The missing link species, the interim species or the connecting species. You're claiming that those were abnormalities, correct?
I'm claiming that your mutant forms, like your hominins, like your Denisovans, your Neanderthals, your Heidelbergensis, Erectus, Naledi, Homo floresiensis, these are the ones that are found outside of Africa. Now, Erectus is found inside Africa as well, but remember, there's that first out of Africa migration, the first of two out of Africas, where Erectus left and then independently evolved into all your other hominins outside of Africa. So you find your hominins outside of Africa. That's why when modern Homo sapiens left and they had that genetic reshaping, that's why I understand what you're saying in the explanation as to why they remained interfertile, but it assumes the millions of years. We don't have to get into that. Yeah. Two, the major genetic reshaping was literally from Homo erectus, a totally different species, into modern Homo sapiens, which is a radical genetic changes. And yet when they met up with Neanderthals after 400,000 years, that's where the problem arises, is that they still, now I could see if they produced offspring that were infertile, but the fact that they produce fertile offspring and we have 2 to 5% Neanderthal genetics, genes in our genetics, that's where I find it problematic. But yeah, in regards to your hominins that are found outside of Africa, the paleo experts themselves agree that a lot of the bones and a lot of the atypical features, anomalous features, are the result of pathology and disease. So I'm just saying this corroborates, Trinkhouse's conclusions corroborate with my own conclusions regarding the out of Middle East event.
Okay.
Go ahead. I know I said a lot there. You guys take your time.
Oh, you're good. But I just wanted to say, I don't think you can assume that there's a massive genetic restructuring if we don't have the genome. And since we know that Neanderthals were like 99.7% similar or whatever, our common ancestor, assuming common ancestry, which I think we have pretty good reason to believe, would have had to have been somewhere in between. So they would have been more similar to us than Neanderthals because we've been evolving in separate directions for 400,000 years. So our most recent common ancestor, if we're saying it's Homo erectus, I believe it's a population of Homo heidelbergensis is current thought, but I don't know for sure. It would have been probably like 99.85 instead of 99.7 or less than that, right? Because they've been going in opposite directions.
Now, how much of the, so we've got their whole genome, essentially. We got their whole nuclear genome. We know their chromosomes. We got their mitochondrial DNA, for example. So my point would be, okay, the fact that they are interfertile, the fact that they're still 99.7% similar to modern Homo sapiens, and like I said earlier, your Erectus, your Hobbit, your Neanderthals, Denisovans, all these variants of what I say are just a single species, and the lumpers versus the splitters would agree with that they were all just part of one big intermingling, interbreeding metapopulation. These facts and these data points that are agreed upon even by the paleo experts, for example, they're more consistent with the out of Babel, the out of Middle East theory, because they're only separated by about 1,000 years or so. So this makes sense that they've all met up, they've interbred. Wait. Are only 99.7% similar. There's no like far-fetched storytelling that. Yeah, go ahead, Speed. What are your thoughts?
You're still claiming that because they broke up because they split 400,000 years ago, you're still claiming that they can't mate, and we're saying that's not true. And I think Walker brought up what was it? Tigers and lions.
The fish.
Yeah.
Split 3 million years ago.
Well, yeah, and the paddlefish and the sturgeons are crazy.
And that goes into a whole other separate topic and argument that, hey, listen.
Okay, but basically you don't have a point. You don't have a point.
Felids really diverge hundreds of thousands of years ago, like it's suggested, just like with the fish. I think you said millions of years. That's where it comes down to the millions of years issue. It's not like for example, all your domestic dogs, Canis domesticus, they've all been, what is there, about 450? They've all been artificially selected from a couple of generic, probably wolves, I think they say, within the last, actually within a few thousand years or so. Are they all interfertile? Can they all interbreed, all your domestic dogs? Poodle, Great Dane, for example, or your like
genetically? Probably. Biologically, probably not.
Because I would want for me to have a sufficient explanation and answer to that, I would want to see something today that we know has split and diverged or even been selected for with your breeds within even in human lifetime, recorded lifetime. And let's see if they can interbreed, for example. And then we don't have to assume the millions of years. So if we could prove that all these 450 breed dogs can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, then you might have a bit of a point there. You know what I mean? But just going to some divergence between types of fish and what was the other example you used with the cats? Well, that's just assuming the millions of years. Let's look at something.
Wait. Let's assume 6,000 years then. Okay, we came out of Africa 6,000 years ago. Neanderthals came out of Africa 6,000 years ago. Who cares about millions of years? So we mutated faster.
Okay, do you want to get to?
You can't just use your 6,000 year timeline. You have to prove that in another thread in another talk before you can use that. You can't. We are talking about. Okay, we're presenting to you our model, and we're telling you that in our model there is no problem with 2 million years apart and something mating, and we're telling you that is the case because of genetics, because of molecular genetics, not because of any assumption of millions of years. It has nothing to do with millions of years. Okay.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point you brought up. Just so we at least have enough time to discuss that, then, since we've touched on a lot of good topics. I know Walker and I could probably talk for hours about the fact that the Neanderthals buried their dead, and we could talk about Trinkhaus forever. I'm curious, but Walker, when you talk to Trinkhaus, I'm very interested in his thoughts. Okay. And what he thinks about young Earth creationists, Let's see if my prediction pans out. That I'm sure he's going to have a totally different conclusion.
But we don't have to be in a hurry standing, because I'm 69 years old, and my great grandma lived to 106 in 1956. So that gives me like 37 years. And for 37 years, I am going to do nothing but concentrate on you and Ramat and John Maddox. Okay?
I love it. Yep. It keeps me busy too. Yeah. It's fun. We're battling each other.
James Downard injected a question, which I think is really. When you said lumpers and what were the other ones? Lumpers and
splitters.
Splitters, right? Who are the lumpers? Who agree with you?
So the lumpers are the ones. For example, let me go over back here. The lumpers are the ones that oftentimes. Are you familiar with the bone pits where they've discovered? I don't have the reference in front of me, but a lot of different bones. But I think it was either 3 or 4 skulls that exhibited variation consistent with Neanderthals, anatomically modern humans, Erectus, and Heidelbergensis. And the lumpers, because they're all found in the same bone pits where it looked like they intermingled and interbred, the interbred was more of an inference. But the lumpers concluded, okay, they're found in the same spot. The variation overlaps. Therefore, they lump them all into the Homo neanderthalensis category, even though we've seen variation of the other 3 species. So with the lumpers, they'll take, let's say, anything that has kind of the variation of like Erectus, Neanderthal, they'll lump them into one category. Now, they'll consider them subspecies, right? Homo sapien or Homo sapiens subspecies Homo neanderthalensis, for example. Mm-hmm. Homo sapiens subspecies.
Can I ask something real quick?
Hold on a second. Are you talking about the Spanish cave with the Neanderthal? Bone pits, pit of bones.
There's been a few of them. I can find the reference here if you want. Let me see.
We do.
I'll find it. There's been a few.
We're all about references.
Well, okay.
What's an off the cuff? I don't have every single reference in front of me, but yeah. Go
James says you can't name the scientist, can you?
I can name the scientist. For example, Pablo, what I was talking about, he concludes that Homo neanderthalensis is a subspecies. Where's the quote?
Well, how do you spell his name?
So the whole idea, here's something that Dan was talking about the other day. The whole idea of species doesn't really work biologically. It's more lineage. Like I could find a lumper who would group us with genus Pan, right? Like call us pan-sapiens. And that doesn't mean that, like, we're still an independent lineage. And taxonomically, that's valid, right? I
didn't know that. Is there really lumper? I'm not opposed to it, but are there some lumpers that go that far?
Yeah. There's people who argue that we should be grouped with chimpanzees and bonobos. But
I can't say I'm surprised, but yeah, the lumpers oftentimes do go. Yeah. Well, it's like what you're saying here, where it says has led some anthropologists to claim Homo neanderthalensis should be considered a subspecies of Homo sapiens rather than a separate species. Yeah, those would be your splitters are just looking at any little bit of morphological variation and claim it's a different species. But it's kind of hard with the fossil record because, as Dr. Cardinal said, we don't have the genetics. And we know that there's a lot of overlapping variation. Yeah,
I have a question there.
This guy has a chin, but he's also got if just that skull cap of him was fossilized and we didn't have the actual chin and everything else to corroborate with it, they may conclude that this is more of a Homo neanderthalensis. So with fragmented bones and no genetics, sometimes
wait. So are you saying that not having the complete skeleton of the complete fossil of a of subhuman species are insufficient to categorize them as different species, or?
No, well, I mean, that's why there's the type specimen, right? The one that they compare all the other finds to conclude, what species does this belong to. But a lot of times you do find isolated bones, like just skull caps, where they say, okay, this morphology seems to be most consistent with Homo neanderthalensis. Therefore, this, and then they compare it to the type specimen, therefore conclude. So a lot of times, it's just, like if you look at a full skeleton of a Neanderthal or, you name any one of the hominids, oftentimes, especially with the Australopithecines, it's all isolated bones where they think it's the same creature that they've reconstructed. But oftentimes the reconstructions are just from a bunch of isolated, fragmented bones that they can oftentimes reconstruct accurately. I'm not against that. But when you just find a skull cap in isolation, like if you found his skull cap in isolation, you're probably not going to put him in the category of Homo sapiens. Walker, what do you think? You seem to be up to date on this.
With respect to what? Sorry.
Well, just with the
should they be lumped?
A lot of the isolated bones that they find, like they oftentimes find, like if they find an isolated skull cap, for example, and it has more morphology consistent with a Homo neanderthalensis versus like a Homo sapiens, they may designate that Homo neanderthalensis.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, so if you dig something out of the ground and it's not super characteristic, you can usually assign like a general area. So if someone pulled out a femur out of the ground, it's going to be roughly the same from Homo sapiens sapien to Homo neanderthalensis, right? So at that, they probably wouldn't try to designate a species. But if they found a skull cap or a jaw fragment or something like that, then yeah, they would probably consider that valid enough to designate into Homo neanderthalensis.
If you guys want to make a few more points, I'm looking for the pit of bones that he's.
Yeah, the pit of bones and the name of that tabo or whatever. We want that. Did I spell that right? Can you spell it for me?
Okay. I believe. See, there's been many. The one that I'm specifically referring to is. I believe the variation seen in it was Neanderthal erectus, Homo sapiens for sure, and I think Heidelbergensis. But it was in 1992. The team was led by Juan Luis Arzuaga. The pit of bones, I believe, Cima de los Huesos. I'm probably butchering that.
Can you put those in chat so we have?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah. By the way, any paper I've mentioned, I put it in the private chat.
Okay, let me do that right now. You guys keep talking and then hopefully we can get to the hypermutating, because it seems like that would be the biggest point of contention. I definitely want to be around for. Okay, go ahead as I type this in.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say my biggest point of contention is kind of related to this, but I don't think whether you want to lump them or lump them into the same species or split them species on species basis is kind of irrelevant as to whether Neanderthals are an outgroup, right? So even if you find someone who lumps them within Homo sapiens, they would still be considered an outgroup to all living Homo sapiens.
Well, what's your best definition of? Because it's so weird, because Dr. Cardinal, from all the people that I've debated and discussed with, and the people that I've even heard Ken Hovind debate, they always define species in a way that would suggest a lot of your hominids would have to be hominins, I should say, would have to be one species. But now Dr. Stern Cardinal, now he admits that the species term, the idea of species, is arbitrary.
Yeah.
And therefore now he doesn't have to lump them in together. But he almost seemed like an exception to the rule from just my experience, though. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No,
like, what would be your best definition of species?
No, we don't talk about species so much as clades and in relationships.
Yeah, so I think the concept of species, at least in the way that we define it, is very centric on us, right? Clades get smaller and smaller as you get closer to us. You know, you start with, like, I recently found a paper, you know, two species within the coelacanth genus Latimeria are separated by 40 million years. And there's one species, the Indonesian coelacanth, with two subpopulations that are separated by 13 million years, right? If we're going by that, then we should be the same species as gorillas. You know, as you get closer to Homo sapiens, the requirement for something to be designated as a species shrinks, like, dramatically. So I think the concept of species, it's useful so that we know what we're talking about, but that's not as important as the lineage itself and where that lineage diverged from other lineages that are related.
Right. So what I typed it in. I'm pretty sure this is the one. I've got a ton of sources here. I believe that's the one. Look it up. And there should be, let me see. It says Stringer decided to classify all the diverse skeletons as Neanderthals. And he said, let me see, in spite of all the variation they display, they get sucked in with the Neanderthal. Once that happens, it becomes very difficult to prevent the rest of the European material from getting sucked in as well. And that is lumping in, yeah, like I said, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens. That's just one bit of the pit of bones. But the fact, like, for example, like you were saying earlier, though, even just considering, species are good to a point, slightly arbitrary, but like you were bringing up earlier, Walker, with the fact that their fire use, their hunting, their burial of the dead, their obvious evidence for spirituality, the fact that we interbred with them. I mean, my position that is they're just a human variant.
Okay. Yeah, well, I would agree with that.
Far-fetched. Like, what's your, like, you know, just given everything we know about them from different lines of evidence in different fields, is that, because if they were living today, I'd almost be uncomfortable pointing at a Neanderthal and saying, hey, you're a different species. I mean, everything we see regarding them seems they were spiritual beings. They were, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Would you be comfortable saying, hey, you're a different species if they're alive today, just as you would be comfortable looking at them in the fossil record and saying, hey, you're a different species? Go ahead, Walker.
I think if they were alive today, our definition of Homo sapien would be broader, right? We would include their lineage within Homo sapiens. I think they would fit most definitions as a human variant, but like I said, that's kind of obfuscating the point that they're an outgroup to any living humans. Like, we're closer related to the Khoisan people, which are generally considered the most genetically distinct, right?
Yes.
So we're closer to Khoisan people than anybody would be to Neanderthals. Neanderthals are not part of any known mitochondrial haplogroup within our clade, right? They're a lineage that diverged before our last common ancestor.
Do you know, like, what's the max amount of mitochondrial DNA differences that separate, let's say, but us, non-Africans, non-Bushmen, as you can say, like the Khoisan? Yeah. What would be the maximum that separate, let's say, me and you, Walker?
Oh, I have no idea. Probably pretty small, because we'd both be in haplogroup L2, I believe, which is pretty tiny.
I'm gonna post a lecture. You guys would really enjoy it. It's let me see. I got it right here. It says what DNA says. It's not creationist or anything like that. Don't worry. It says what DNA says about our human family. Episode 2, Ancient Relatives, Neanderthals, Denisovans. He goes, I think he does 7 examples where the average between any two, like, humans is about 7. Versus the Neanderthals, I think, is, I'm going to post it in the chat so you can watch. I've only watched it once. I did make some notes, but I think it was about 30.
Yeah.
Which means, according to evolution, the differences reflect, like that nested hierarchy. For example, we are more similar. We have fewer differences with the chimpanzee than we do with the old world monkeys because of time of divergence. We share a more recent common ancestor with the chimpanzee than we would with an old world monkey, than we would with a dog and a fish. So those differences, that's why they oftentimes look at those highly conserved mitochondrial DNA proteins, which natural selection preserves because they're important functional roles. Therefore, those differences seem to be consistent with times of divergence, consistent with the nested hierarchy of evolution. So you're saying the Neanderthals were more similar to the Khoisan peoples and the Africans than we are to the Neanderthals. Therefore, we share more of a common ancestor, obviously, with the Africans in the out of Africa scenario than we do with the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals go even further back than non-Africans, Africans, and Neanderthals. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, no, that's right. But I think one minor confusion is the fact it's not just the number of differences, it's what those specific differences are.
Yes, the genetic markers.
Yeah. So the single nucleotide polymorphisms, right? So if our 100th great ancestor had a specific mitochondrial mutation, they would have passed it down to all subsequent descendants if it's not subject to selection pressures, obviously. But so what we're looking at so we have single nucleotide polymorphisms on Neanderthal genomes that are also held in common with chimps, but not with us, right? And the chances that would just be a back mutation are very small. And the fact that they're so frequent throughout the genome makes the p-value like infinitesimally high. We would have to have a z-score of like thousands for them to not be nested outside of us.
Right. So now the single nucleotide polymorphisms, actually, for what you said with the divergence, you're right. It's not the amount of differences. It's the genetic markers that would more so differentiate. The genetic markers is the best way to put it. So you did explain it. You did explain it good there. The SNP. So right now you're looking with the genetic markers you're specifically looking at. Are you looking in the nuclear DNA or the mitochondrial DNA?
Okay, so I was looking for a paper earlier today. I didn't have that much time to look for papers. I was kind of busy today. But I did find one, but it focuses on nuclear DNA more so than mitochondrial DNA. But I think it still shows the point. Speed, could you share the screen real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. So can everyone see that? Yeah.
Let's see. Where is I got to find out how to shut down RJ's. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so this is mostly just a graphic. It's from a paper. I can link the paper. But this is just, 4 bases from the gene HACNS1. I don't know what it does. But as you can see from the graph, I didn't mean to click on that. As you can see from the graph, the chimps share on position 4 a base in common with Neanderthals, but not with humans, right? And so there's, let's just say, a 1 in 3 chance, assuming all mutations are equally likely on that spot. There's a 1 in 3 chance that they would have a back mutation towards what the chimps have, right? And if we find 20 of them, it would be 1 in 3 to the 20th power that the chances of all of these being back mutations. The chances of that happening are just non-existent.
So I like how you're up to date on all this, Walker. It makes it fun to talk to. So give you a compliment for that. Now,
I try my best.
Because we're looking at the nuclear DNA, though, and you've heard me say this before, that means created heterozygosity would apply, and that means since Neanderthals would have had millions of created differences, when we're looking at the differences that the evolutionists assume are all the result of mutations over time, millions and millions of years of mutations. Therefore, according to, as you know, the created heterozygosity model, we would still predict some form of nested hierarchical patterns in the DNA. So it makes it kind of difficult in the nuclear DNA versus the mitochondrial DNA, which is a lot smaller. It's only about, 16,000 letters long or so. And it's consistent because it's uniparentally inherited. You know what I mean? It's not biparentally inherited where you're subject to recombination and all of this all of this mess. So are you pretty much pointing to kind of like a hierarchical pattern in the distribution of the SNPs and the rarity of back mutations occurring to be consistent with that?
Yeah, pretty much. The back. Okay, so I'm just trying to say that the single nucleotide polymorphisms are the SNPs are more closely correlated with a pattern that places Neanderthals as an outgroup to Homo sapiens than nested within Homo sapiens.
Right.
And so, I will admit, I wish I had I was just going to say, I was trying to find a paper on mitochondrial DNA. I could not find one. If I find one, I'll definitely send it to you.
Because Dan's biggest problem is the nesting, of course, but also the hypermutation hypothesis, where he believes, and I believe you're in accord with that the hypermutation hypothesis is inconsistent with what we know about the inbreeding nature of the Neanderthals and the low levels of heterozygosity. So there's a lot of homozygosity in the Neanderthal nuclear genome. And that's where they discovered the homozygosity, and the evidence for inbreeding was in the nuclear genome, from my understanding. Would you agree with that? Is that kind of what you found too?
Yeah, I would agree that that's one of the problems. I think
I'm saying, would you agree that it's the nuclear genome itself being so vastly larger than the mitochondrial DNA compartment? That's where we find the most significant evidence for the inbreeding and the levels of homozygosity.
I do not have any papers, so I can't say yes, but that seems like it would be accurate because nuclear DNA is diploid. But I don't know.
So the hypermutating hypothesis, because it seems like this was the major contention of the debate itself, that the hypermutating hypothesis is inconsistent with the inbreeding nature of the Neanderthals, because hypermutation would lead to more genetic diversity, and yet we know the Neanderthals are less genetic diverse.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yep. Summary.
Right.
So why do you believe that so I think I reiterated it good, but do you guys want to expand on it a little bit and explain why you believe that there's no way to combine the two or show any consistency with the two? Like the floor is yours if you want to. I'm curious. Just give me your thought, because that seems like that's the major point of contention. Is, hey, listen, you can't combine the two. They're mutually exclusive. Is what Dan Cardinal was saying.
Yeah, hypermutation is going to lead to a highly heterozygous population, basically a diverse population, and that isn't what we saw in Neanderthals. So there was no indication that there was hypermutation. There was indication that there was inbreeding, which would end up with a lot of homozygous alleles. So that is the point. Those two things don't go together. And the other thing is, you kept misunderstanding Dan when he said diverging, that they diverged. You kept thinking he was talking about diversity. And he may have used the wrong word at some point. I haven't got the transcript yet, but he was talking about divergence, not diversity. Okay, diversity is what you would get if you had a hypermutating population. Like Lenski's bacteria, a lot of the strains were hypermutating. So anyway, so the two things don't go together. You're claiming that they broke off in just a few hundred years. That they broke off and they hypermutated into Neanderthals. Of course, you have your epigenetic rescue device, but it just doesn't make any sense. And the other problem with it is that Dr. Dan was trying to tell you that if there was a common ancestor, if the common ancestor was the human branch that you're looking at, then the genetic markers from the human branch would have had to be lost on the Neanderthal branch. And then we would have to gain our own genetic markers after the split, after Babel, or right before Babel. And none of that made any sense. And that was a problem that Dr. Dan was having, is that he knows how genetics works, and you don't seem to be quite aware of how genetics works in detail. You haven't gone into sufficient detail in your studies to figure out that what you were saying didn't hash out. Okay. And that's where you two were fighting last night.
Okay, so, and I did hear everything. I appreciate all that, and I think you were incredibly detailed, which is good. So it gives us something to work with. Now, would you also agree with Walker and I that, well, you know what? Since I'll address it one by one. So you said I misunderstood the divergence.
Wait. You said Walker and I in one, like together?
Yeah.
Walker, I'm
Wait, so which point?
Because Walker and I were agreeing that you're.
Oh, and also, if you don't provide all your sources, I'm going to sick RJ on you.
Are you going to stick that mouse on me that your cat just brought in?
Yeah.
Oh,
Dinner is served. Okay, so
The army of raccoons.
diversity is different than divergence, and I understood that right off the bat. Now the thing is, what was confusing and what seemed to be conflating unintentionally was how he was saying the hypermutating hypothesis then leads to the prediction from our side, if it's true, that there should be higher levels of genetic diversity.
Right.
So that's why I was saying, hey, are you going back on your claim now that we would predict higher levels of genetic diversity? Because my claim, so the divergence, I understand. I would expect there to be some divergence between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, given their given the genetic reshaping that has occurred in the thousands of years since since the Neanderthals went extinct, for example. The divergence pretty much just between two groups tells us how different the two groups are from one another. And I understood, but he kept saying, it's his main point seemed to be, listen, we know Neanderthals have low genetic diversity. Therefore, that's inconsistent with your hypermutation hypothesis. I disagreed with that. It turned out that we both agreed that the Neanderthals are highly inbred. Yeah. Therefore, the next question is, if they really were hypermutating to account for the mitochondrial DNA differences that make it appear that they're, because they seem, when you pull it up on a phylogenetic chart, they seem to branch off heavily from the African. Their branches are even longer than the African branch. That's how many more differences they have than we do. So our biggest disagreement, since we agreed with the inbreeding, our biggest disagreement is, how do you incorporate the hypermutation into the inbreeding? So that's where but I understood what he meant by diversity.
So how do you incorporate that?
So before this is where I would see if you agree with Walker and I. Do you agree that the nuclear DNA itself is where we find a lot of the levels of homozygosity and the evidence for inbreeding?
Yep.
Right. So here's the thing.
You're not going to get homozygous mitochondrial RNA or DNA.
Right.
Single
speed. Yeah. So here's the thing. Okay. The best way I can put it, and this is kind of, unfortunately, near the end, we got away from the 90-second increments, which is okay. I think we're going to have a second discussion where it's just on this question. But the hypermutation would have a big effect on, let's say, your mitochondrial DNA, your Y chromosome, because those are uniparentally inherited DNA, as we would agree. The mitochondrial DNA we inherit almost exclusively from our mothers, Y chromosome from our fathers. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. The biparentally inherited DNA, though, as we were talking about earlier, which is the nuclear DNA, recombined, for example, created heterozygosity would now apply. As me and Walker were talking about earlier, Neanderthals would have had millions of created differences. What this means is the corresponding increase due to the hypermutation would be virtually undetectable in the nuclear DNA because of the incredible amount of inbreeding. But by far, Speed, the greatest impact would be, as I said, due to the levels of inbreeding. That means it's entirely plausible to have biparentally inherited DNA be less diverse, which we agreed with. We spent most of the debate on that, but we agreed with it. And yet less diverse than modern humans, we should say, let's be correct. But the uniparentally inherited DNA to be more diverse, which is the mitochondrial DNA, which is where we need the hypermutation to have the most significant impact, because that's where the DNA differences are that cannot be attributed to created heterozygosity and that are corresponding to the most recent common ancestor of modern people group. So what are your thoughts on that? Go ahead.
Well, okay, so you said that they would have been front-loaded with allelic diversity and stuff like that.
In the
but we,
DNA, yeah.
Yeah, in the nuclear DNA. But we still have DNA samples from Homo sapiens from that time period, right? And we still don't see them as an in-group.
Right, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and another thing is...
Yeah, but you're looking at created heterozygosity. So you're looking at nuclear DNA markers, because now we're talking about the mitochondrial. So are you saying the mitochondrial DNA? Because I want to know why you believe that the hypermutation is inconsistent. I get what you're saying about the phylogeny, the phylogenetics, where they...
Yeah, well, that was a separate point, but yeah.
Yeah, so just the hypermutation. Why do you believe that they are inconsistent with each other? Because, as I said, the inbreeding would be your greatest effect in the nuclear DNA.
Okay.
The hypermutation would be almost undetectable. But yet the mitochondrial DNA, which is only 16,000 letters long, this is where there would be the most significant impact, and therefore both can be consistent. Yes, you have hypermutation in the whole genome, of course. Of course, you have hypermutation in the whole genome. But the nuclear DNA, the size of it, the recombination that occurs in it, combined with our position of created heterozygosity, those mutations would be virtually undetectable, but not undetectable in the mitochondrial DNA. So that's how they both can... Dr. Dan says they have to be mutually exclusive, when in fact that's not the case. And I'm glad that we ended up agreeing that the inbreeding is observed. But now we have to go into the mitochondrial DNA, and that's where the hypermutation is going to have the most significant impact. So, like, what would be your objections to that?
So how long? Okay, you think the Neanderthals split off 4,200 years ago from Adam and Eve, the Adam and Eve line, or the Noah line? Okay, so when did they go extinct?
The Neanderthals?
Yeah.
So they would have went extinct. So you, like I said, my position on the Neanderthal is a little bit different than the other hominin. So it would have been pre-Babel. Okay, so they split off. They adapted to your ice age related conditions, harsh environmental conditions. But what I say about the Neanderthals being closer to the initial flood event and creation, their genomes at that time, kind of like Walker said, the genomes we're looking at now, the sequences we have now, they are kind of nearing the end of the Neanderthals' existence, probably a time where they had the most inbreeding, the most mutational load. You know,
when was that? When was that? How long did the Neanderthals last after they split from Noah lineage?
It's a good question, but so if they were close, if they split off closer to the creation event and the flood event, at that point, which I don't believe we have their genetic sequences, as Walker and I agreed about, their genomes would have been less. Their genomes would have been more heterozygous, less mutational load. They wouldn't have had incredible inbreeding. The inbreeding occurred after the migration pre-Babel, and the accelerated genetic degeneration would have occurred for one. You've got superior genomes that are now experiencing harsh environmental conditions combined with the inbreeding itself, bringing to the forefront lots of genetic mistakes. So that would have happened rapidly. It would have been rapid, accelerated genetic degeneration. How many years exactly? So pre-Babel, the flood 4,500 years ago, probably within 1,500 years or so after the flood.
So that would, okay, so, but if they split off, okay, the flood was 4.4, so 4.2, so if they lasted for 1,300 years.
Let me grab a pen too.
We're at 5.7 thousand years now where they went extinct.
That's only 2,900 years ago that you're claiming the Neanderthals went extinct.
So let's see. So we got, just wait, I'll do the, so we got 4,500 years since the flood. Okay.
No, actually, you said they split off like.
Right, yeah. I'm going to start writing it down instead of just kind of throwing guesses out there. We got 4,500 years since the flood. Let's say another 500 to Babel, which means Neanderthals, let's say 45,000. How many years did you say? 2,200? They've probably been extinct for about 3,500 years.
That means they have 700 years
to live and mutate.
Since the flood, 4,500. They branch off within the next 300 years. It's tough to say because a lot of, like, even the paleo experts will agree, like your like Floresiensis. Once you get those that small tribe, that population that's inbred, due to founder effects, inbreeding depression, for example, rapid genetic decline can happen quick. So I don't know how rapid it happened, but I always use this example. You guys don't have the assumption of superior genomes, of course, so that's fine. But I always use the example that if I'm on a purely alkaline diet and I haven't had McDonald's or fast food in years, okay, for example, and then all of a sudden my body's not used to that chemical garbage, and I start going, like if you've ever seen the movie Super Size Me, that guy had McDonald's 3 times a day for a few months, and he declined rapidly. Imagine the Neanderthals, which had
it is brow ridge
Brandt stopped. Okay, I think if the brow ridge was prior.
I do have a question. So I mean, are you claiming like that the primary source of genetic deterioration would have been due to like excessive inbreeding within the population?
Yeah. I think it accelerated because, like Walker said, the sequences we have now would have been at a point where the Neanderthals were the most inbred and genetically compromised. But I don't believe they were originally like that. So yeah, the most of it would have been harsh environmental conditions combined with the inbreeding, which brings because Dan is right, inbreeding itself doesn't really increase the mutation rate. It just brings recessive mutations to the forefront. Now, there are some deleterious mutations that are disease causing that I was reading about, that if they come to the forefront, they can, as a result, increase mutation rates, but this is an exception to the rule. So so environmental conditions combined with the inbreeding would have resulted in the rapid decline.
Okay, so that brings me to the kind of second point of like what, and I don't know, like maybe this is still an area of interest, like within creationist research, but what kind of like selective pressure, or not selective pressure, but what kind of environmental pressure would have encouraged like them to continuously interbreed with each other? I mean, once they reach a significant population, I mean, you would think, okay, they're probably going to go out, do their own thing, you know, maybe start doing hunting, gathering tribes or whatever,
right?
You know, not continuously breed with one another, like with local people groups.
Okay, so what selective pressures? I want to make sure I'm not like misrepresenting your question. So,
what selective pressures would have caused them like to continuously interbreed with each other?
Okay. Well, it seems from what we know, and from what I've read in the literature and what paleo experts are saying, that they existed in small tribes as hunter-gatherers. So it seems like it had to do with the Neanderthals, their cultural way, their way of just being in small isolated groups. So the selective pressures probably being the fact that they were hunter-gatherers, had to live in caves, for example. So yeah, they were robust, they were well adapted, but it seems like when the modern Homo sapiens came in, the paleo experts say the modern Homo sapiens were not as robust, or well adapted, but they had higher intelligence, and therefore, you know, like your Neanderthal may look like your cavemen because they were skilled in some areas and not skilled in others. So I think just their hunter-gatherer nature would have resulted in them existing in small tribes. But I mean, we don't have every answer, and I don't even think the paleo, because anytime I watch these lectures, they always say, "Hey, we know so little," which is fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean, it's something. I mean, obviously, we don't have a time machine to go back and tell, but it's just an interesting thing to consider.
Trying our best.
We are. I want to say it's been an hour and a half. My wife's like, "Hey, when are we going to watch the movie?" Because this has been so respectful. You guys have been so good. Before I leave, though, why don't you guys just kind of give the last words, give some critiques. I won't even respond to it, and then that'll feel like it's, I think, fair for everybody. Like, what are your thoughts on how I explain, because I truly do believe, and we're going to touch on this in our next discussion, me and Dr. Stern Cardinal. I'm glad that we agree with the inbreeding. The biggest thing to take away when you watch that debate is we disagree that the low genetic diversity is not consistent with the hypermutation. And I think I have a plausible explanation as to why they are consistent, but you guys have the last word. You've been respectful. This has been fun, and I'll just kind of sit back and listen and write things down and kind of go from there.
Okay. Wait, before we do that, I did have a question about like your model and stuff, right?
Okay, yeah.
So this is a legitimate question because I don't have any papers and I don't know what the support for this is. But how do the mitochondrial genome sequences compare from disparate populations of Neanderthals, and how does that compare to their nuclear genomes, right? So like if you have a Neanderthal genome from France and a Neanderthal genome from like northern Russia, what would the differences be between those two mitochondrial DNA versus their nuclear DNA?
Right. Good. Okay. Yeah. Good question. I'm writing that. So we've got Neanderthal, let's say DNA from where? Russia?
Yeah. Let's just say like as far as you can get into the Neanderthal range.
Okay. So like Siberia and
Spain or something.
Spain, yeah. And that's kind of the example I gave with Dan. I said, listen, I do believe that it's reliable because we get such consistent results. You get DNA from Siberia, DNA from Spain, and they seem to line up and still group them all together. You'd think that they would be grouped all over the place. It'd be a mess, but it seems to be consistent. So your question is, how does mtDNA compare with these two samples in different areas on the planet, obviously, with the nuclear DNA? Probably pretty consistent. It seems like, because I think Pabo, watch that lecture. Okay, actually, I'm going to give you another lecture from Pabo. It seems like I think they did 1,000. They did 1,000 sequences or 1,000 different people and variants to test, and it seems like on average it's about 30 differences with the mitochondrial DNA. With the nuclear DNA, it's all pretty similar as well. Kind of like you were pointing out with the SNPs. If I said consistent or similar, like what would you think about that? Because I don't know. I gotta look to know exactly. But
yeah, well, I'm just wondering because that's kind of a prediction that your model would have to make, right? So if you're saying that the nuclear DNA can't be used to confer ancestry, because I agree it's usually worse than mitochondrial DNA, but it's not impossible to confer ancestry using nuclear DNA.
No, it's not.
So let's say if you have these two disparate populations, your theory would predict that their mitochondrial sequences would be extremely different because they still have the hypermutation, but their nuclear sequences would be really similar. And I don't know. My personal like intuitive guess, I don't know, science isn't ever intuitive. My intuitive guess would be that the nuclear DNA and the mitochondrial DNA would show roughly the same amount of differences, but I don't know, and that's something I'll have to look at.
I think mtDNA would show less out of necessity unless you're looking at.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, like relative.
With nuclear DNA today, with modern Homo sapiens, I mean, we're looking at between like 60 to 100 per generation, per person per generation. So there's a lot more mutations getting through in the germ cell line in the nuclear DNA. Mitochondrial DNA, like Speed said, is a lot less, which makes sense because it's only 16,000 letters long. And with the important functions that are encoded by mitochondrial DNA proteins, typically natural selection works better on mitochondrial DNA because you get a mutation in your mitochondrial DNA that affects the heart. I mean, you're going to die. Natural selection is going to weed you out real quick. So I would say consistency, nuclear DNA across the board is going to show high levels of homozygosity, which seems to be the case. And mitochondrial DNA is going to show consistent results, probably 30 or so differences. You can watch those lectures and see. I'm going to rewatch them. But point is, we need hypermutation in mitochondrial DNA. Because remember, here's the underlying issue. This is where Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal's problem is we use pedigree-based studies on modern Homo sapiens today. We use the empirical method, and we track it back to about 6,000 years. But his criticism is once you throw Neanderthals in there, ancient DNA, suddenly it's all out of whack because of how many differences they have versus modern Homo sapiens. So that's where the hypermutating hypothesis comes in to explain the mitochondrial DNA differences.
Okay, but that doesn't explain the nuclear DNA differences. So
what's the nuclear? Yeah, but we've already agreed that the nuclear DNA shows high levels of homozygosity and highly inbred. It's very low genetic diversity, consistent with
them to our line, basically.
We're not highly inbred as Homo sapiens.
It doesn't matter if we're highly inbred. We differ in a number of genetic markers in nuclear DNA.
Right.
And I don't know the details of that, but I'm going to know it. I'm going to look into it. But so I'm trying to figure out a steel man for your model. And the last Neanderthal being 1300 BC is kind of interesting. I think you're going to have trouble supporting that one. Oh, and
we find, well, here's the thing though, we find all the different hominin so-called species, your human variants, they've all commingled, interbred. You know, I think it was some Australian Aborigines that the evolutionists date to about 12,000 years. Now, I don't agree with the date, but they date to about 12,000 years with the morphology. This is another paper that I'll have to just go on at the top of my head, but I'll get it to you guys earlier. I did give you the other one on the pit of bones in the side chat. I'm not sure if you found that, but they found skulls just 12,000 years ago, according to the evolutionary time frame. Actually, before I go on with this, when do you guys believe, according to your model, that Neanderthals went extinct? 50,000 years or something?
Yeah, I think most estimates put it at about 30,000.
Okay. So it was far earlier than that, okay? And the morphology in these skulls were like identical to Neanderthal. But the paleo experts could not conclude that they were Neanderthals because it was too soon. And they concluded it was modern Homo sapiens, but they had to, because at that point Neanderthals had gone extinct. So, and they even admit that if those skulls, if those bones and the morphology were found, let's say 100,000 years ago, boom, Neanderthals for sure. But the date was so inconsistent. So the evidence does seem to suggest that we've all intermingled, coexisted, interbred. Now the Neanderthals, yeah, they would have experienced rapid accelerated genetic degeneration. It probably happened quick. I don't know how quick, but you got to look at all these even the Denisovans and how it was a shocker too. I got an interesting Joe Rogan video where he had a guest on talking about the Denisovans, and he was talking about some fascinating stuff. And he's a paleo expert. He was admitting like this is not what we thought. I'll give you guys that link too. But to take the final word before my wife kills me, and then we'll continue this talk.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Number
you trying to get me a divorce?
Yeah.
Okay,
the real simple. Will you promise, because I like to put the links in my videos, that you will send me, let's see, Joe Rogan on Denisovans, I can probably find that, but that one on the Australians, the 12K years. Okay, that one. Can you give me that link? And you mentioned rewatching some lectures. What lectures are you talking about?
So I posted one lecture in the chat. I don't know if it showed up because I'm not moderator or not. But I got all my history. I'm going to send you 2 lectures.
Well, put them in private chat.
Right now? Well, I got it from my phone. Here, I promise you, right now, everybody's hearing live. I'm gonna shoot them to you in an email, because to be honest with you, I want you to watch these lectures.
Okay,
lectures, you're gonna love them. And they're up to date too. You're gonna love them.
Okay, so if you don't if you don't give me that paper and the lectures, then you have to give me a refund on all the books I bought. Okay.
Wait a minute, that's not in the fine print, but yes, you got my word. You got my word right here.
Okay, we have your word. We'll see if your word is good.
All right, guys. Yeah, this has been fun, and we can even do chapter by chapter in like kind of like you ask question speed. This has been fun. You guys are respectful to talk to. I think it's enjoyable, so we can do this more often if you want. And I'll let you guys have your fun now without me here. But it's been a good 90 minutes.
Yeah, standing. Please don't listen to the rest of this because we're going to talk about you.
Yeah, I'll be sitting there watching a movie, and my wife will look over me and be like, "Honey, why are you crying?" I'll say, "I thought they were my friends." My hominin friend.
RJ wants another source. What source is he talking about?
I'm glad. Yeah, James Downard. He did a whole critique of contested bones, so he should be on top of this. Although I differ a little bit in some of. You're not going to find a lot of what we talked about today in contested bones, but James wants sources never. Okay, which one is it? Let's see.
What do you want a source for this time?
Yeah, what source?
Lectures, possible glitches. One depends on plowing through it long. Okay. Yeah, we are going to get the transcript for this, and we're going to analyze this, and we're going to try to steel man your timeline. And I'm going to try to make sense out of it.
Oh, the lectures. Okay. I'll send them to you, Speed, and then you guys are going to love these lectures. They're,
are they by that AIG?
No. They're not creationists. Like this one is called Svante Pabo is his name. He's
okay. Pablo.
A Neanderthal perspective on human origins with Svante Pabo, 2018, 157,000 views. Ooh, you're gonna love it. But yeah, no, this is all secular lectures. But I got a few I'll send to you as well as the Joe Rogan one. So guys, thanks so much. Don't have too much fun without me though.
Okay.
Peace out.
All right.
Whoa, that guy's a lot of work.
It was pretty fun to talk to him. I've never talked to him before, or really any internet creationists. And
really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess Sal, and unfortunately Maddox for like 30 seconds. Yeah. Well, I want to keep that streak for most of them. But Stanning's a nice guy. I would talk to him again.